Hey there my friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's little video is just an experiment that I was doing and I decided to post it. It's watercolours on Arches cold press watercolour paper, 9" by 12". I've just completely wet the background with deionized water, and I'm just adding two colours, Payne's Grey and Rose Madder, both by Winsor & Newton. The brush I'm using at the moment is let's have a look, a Boldmere 1.5". It's a synthetic. And I'm just sprinkling on a little bit of salt, just table salt, while the paper's still damp. Really, I got the video running on this one, but I wasn't sure whether I was going to make a video out of it or not. So I was just recording it because my video camera was already set up. But yeah, it was just a little bit of an experiment. So I've sketched in the Kingfisher and completely covered that with masking fluid, and that's also by Winsor & Newton. So it's Winsor & Newton masking fluid, Winsor & Newton watercolours. The brush I'm using for the spattering technique is a Zen Art Faux Squirrel Cat's Tongue 3/4". I'm going to be doing a separate video on the Zen Art brushes. I've got a set of vegan brushes and they're working absolutely fantastically, so I will do a video all about that later on. As mentioned in my previous video, I'm now popping the finished painting up in the left hand corner so you can see what I'm actually working towards. So yeah, so I completely wet the paper with water, added a few washes of Payne's Grey and Rose Madder, and now and then I added the salt, and now I'm just spattering on with those two colours again, just to get a very random, out of focus effect for the background. And yeah, this is the best technique I found of spattering paint. If you want a finer spatter, then it's nice to use something like a toothbrush. Okay, so I've removed the masking fluid just by rubbing it very gently with my finger, and it doesn't disturb the paper underneath. I've sketched in the rest of the Kingfisher because the masking tape had removed the graphite lines a little bit, so I just wanted to make them more visible. And now the brush I'm using now and for the rest of the painting is by Rosemary Co, a series 344, and it's a number 6, and it's my favourite brush. It goes everywhere with me. I really do need to buy a backup one, but I've had this one for a few years, possibly going on for 5 years, and it still works fantastically, and I use it on all my watercolours, watercolour pencils, things like that. Okay, so I've added a little bit of blue to the top of the head, and now I'm just adding a little bit of Rose Madder mixed with blue. So I will be using the rose, because the Rose Madder has been used in the background, I do pull it into the subject. And those of you that know my work and how I work, doesn't matter what medium I work in, if the subject has got a background, then I do pull some of the colours that are in the background into the subject. Okay, now this portion of the video is filmed on an iPhone, and as I said, I wasn't intending to share this. It was just for me to look back at. So please forgive the contrast, the lighting contrast. The iPhone was struggling with the white paper on the white foam board. But as you move further into the video, this does settle down as I'm adding more darks to the subject. The iPhone is then able to focus on that instead. So just bear with me. And the state of my hands as well. Oh my word. Yeah, that's what working with a lot of dry mediums does to your skin when you don't look after them. But they're looking all good now. Nails and yeah, cuticles all looking nice now. Sorry about that. The working life of an artist, or I should say the working hands of an artist. Okay, so just going in and adding some darker blues. Now with traditional watercolours, it's nice to work from dark to light. So first of all, I look for when I'm looking at my reference images, and I am working from my own reference images, I look for the lightest possible tone in part of the subject, and then I mix that colour, match it, you know, near enough, and then work those layers in first, and then I gradually build up. So I go with the lighter areas, then the mid-tone areas, and then to the darker tone areas. And by doing this, you do build up a lot of depth in your painting as well. And the beauty with watercolours is, if you're using it, especially if you're using a staining colour that's harder to lift, is then that you can then glaze translucent layers over the top and build your depth of colour up that way. So popping in a little bit of the detail now across the forehead of this Kingfisher. And as I said, this is really, you know, a small piece. The paper is only 9 inches by 12 inches, so the subject I'm working on is tiny. And if I'd wanted to go in and do a really detailed piece, I would have made the subject a little bit bigger. But it was just, I think it was one afternoon I filmed this, and it was just something to relax to, you know, just to a chill out piece. I hadn't got any expectations for this piece. It was just playtime, and I believe this was the last sheet of paper that I'd got of this Arches cold press at the time, and I just wanted to have a play with it. And yeah, I thought a Kingfisher was in order. So yeah, this brush that's been used for so long, the tip of it does tend to bend slightly. But it still keeps a very fine tip. But I use the slight curve of the tip to my advantage now. So it's like fountain pens, isn't it? Apparently, if you use a fountain pen for a long time, the fountain pen point bends to how you write. So it sort of becomes more unique to you. And this brush has done the same. But I love it. I love this brush. It holds a lot of water, a lot of pigment. Yeah, it's brilliant. And that's the Rosemary Co Series 344 number 6. And that's vegan too. All synthetic. So going in with some darks, and as we build up with the darks, the iPhone gets more comfortable filming and doesn't wash everything out so much. So this video is running at around 36 minutes, so not too long. I edited a lot out because it's more of the same. Rinse and repeat, should we say. So still working as a traditional watercolour at the moment, leaving any white areas white for now. And just keeping an eye on my reference image. I've got my references on my iPad just in front of me, so a quick glance up every now and then to make sure I'm going in the right direction, not adding too much colour, because obviously with watercolours, if you want to work them completely traditional, you don't add white. I do add white as I'm working through this process, and I use a watered down white gouache later on, which you'll see. But if you're working completely traditional, then you wouldn't be adding white at all. But a gouache, all a gouache is an opaque watercolour. So it's still a watercolour, it still behaves as watercolours do, but it just means with the colours being opaque, you can add the white. I just utilise the white. If I'm going out plein air sketching and I'm doing watercolour, I will take a white gouache with me as well. I hope everybody's keeping well and keeping creative. I'm keeping busy this end, so that's good. So still going in with the darks here. When I'm getting to areas where there's like the shape of the beak, I know I've got to be very, very careful that I don't make the beak too big, or, you know, it's so easy just to get carried away and with the dark colours, and if you can't lift them very well, then you're stuck with them. So okay, a little bit of glazing going on there, adding a little bit of green. And I find if you don't glaze, then even though if you have built up a lot of colours, translucent colours, if you don't glaze, it can still look a little bit flat. So in all the mediums I work in, I do bring in glazes as well. And it just allows the light to go through the layers of glazing, bouncing around on the pigment particles, and it just gives you that added depth. I work with artist quality watercolours, so fade resistant, light fast is very good, but always framed behind glass. In sketchbooks it's not so important because they're not going to be open to the UV rays a lot of the time. So if I'm working in a sketchbook, I will work with student quality materials. And Cotman, if you're looking for an inexpensive watercolour line, then Cotman by Winsor & Newton are very good. And obviously, if you buy a Cotman set of watercolour pans in a palette, as you use them, you'll start to realise how the colours that you're more likely to use, and the ones that you're using more often, once they begin to diminish in size, then you can think about replacing those colours with the artist line. Much better than jumping in and going for a large artist set where there's a lot of colours you've paid a lot of money for but you might not use. But if you start off with a Cotman set, there's still a really good paint. The pigmentation is still high. I'm like losing my words today. The light fastness ratings are still very good. And then obviously as you're using colours up, you can replace them with a higher quality artist one. Or you can just stick with the Cotman. Nothing wrong with sticking with the student version either. Whatever meets your budget, whatever gets the job done, that's the main thing. And it's the same with brushes. Although investing in good brushes right at the very beginning is worth it. As long as you take care of them, they will last you a long, long time. Well, the camera, I should say the iPhone has settled down now with filming. Now there's a little bit more contrast in the subject. And here I'm utilising that Winsor & Newton white gouache. But I have thinned it right the way down, so it is acting like a normal watercolour, just with a slight pigment in it. And the thing is, just having a white gouache with you, you can then add it on your palette to other watercolour colours. That takes some saying, other watercolour colours, and you can make them a more pastel hue if you need to, and then add that to your watercolour. So if you just remember that a gouache is an opaque watercolour, all you need is white, just your traditional watercolours and a white gouache. Don't add it to your pans, just add it to your mixing area, and then any of your colours can be made more opaque on a mixing palette and added to your painting. So looking at the little orange patch near his eye, if I wanted to make part of that area more opaque, just mix your orange on your palette, add a little bit of white gouache, and then straight onto your painting. So all you need is white gouache, in addition to your watercolour paints. Now that's showing it more realistic in life. The Arches watercolour paper is an off-white colour, so it's not bright white or anything like that. It's a very natural shade of white. Kinder on the eyes, I think, especially if you're painting outside. If you're going plein air sketching, the last thing you want to be sketching onto is something that is really, really bright white, because it's when it's sunny, it's this paper is bright enough without adding to the issues with a bright white paper. So I do thoroughly recommend the Arches cold press and the Arches hot press, but just the ones where they're off-white, not the bright white ones. So adding a second layer now to this area of the subject, the tail. And the head and beak aren't finished. So at the moment, everything's being built up in layers. I've not finalised anything about the subject yet. And as you can see, the salt worked to treat on the background. When you add salt to a painting, it is a very random hit or miss whether it's going to work. I mean, it will do something as long as the background is still damp. You don't want to add the salt when the paper is too wet, or add the salt when the paper's too dry. It won't do anything. But just as the paper is slowly drying, that's when you just want to pop the salt on, when it's still damp. But as I said, it's very random. Obviously, you're just sprinkling tiny granules of salt onto your paper, and then just let it dry. Let it dry naturally. Don't try and speed the process up with a hairdryer or a heating tool, because it takes away from the effect of the salt. The salt doesn't get to do its job then. So pop the salt on. Go and make a coffee, or have a walk, or put the dinner on, or whatever you need to do, and give it maybe a few hours. Depends how hot your area, the room that you're working in. If it's a warm room, then the paper will dry quicker, obviously. But once the paper has dried and you've given the salt time to absorb the pigment, then all you need to do is hold your painting over a bin and brush the salt off into the bin, or if you're outside, just onto the floor, and you'll be left with a pattern where the salt has absorbed the water and pigment. Okay, just looking at my reference image, and I keep looking at that and make sure these brush strokes are going in the same area, so very light washes of colour. And as I said, all the rest of the painting, apart from the background, is now being done with this Rosemary Co number 6 series 344. I'll list everything in the description below. I've sped up the video to 150%, so just a little bit faster than what I'd normally be working. Just taking my time. Adding in a little bit of detail now. Going in with the darks now. It's when you're working with watercolours, because you are, generally speaking, you are starting off with the lightest of the lights, working light to dark. It can be a little bit daunting for people, especially if they're beginners, not to go dark enough. But you do need the contrast in your painting to make it look realistic. You can't depend on colour alone. Colour alone doesn't make something look realistic. Contrast does. So to get your contrast in at this stage is really nice. So getting the eye in was brilliant, because that's generally the darkest of the darks are in the eye, especially on the reference images for this painting. And also the shadowing underneath this wing was very, very dark. What I generally do is, using a colour picking tool on my iPad, I'll go in and actually look where the darkest areas are on a painting, and this was very, very dark blue. So I mixed a blue, added a little bit of the Payne's grey that I used in the background, just to keep the painting looking as a whole, and so it doesn't look like the bird's been cut out and stuck on. Utilising the background colours into the subject and getting those darks in really, really helps with the overall contrast of the bird in the background. So you can also do things like contrast studies and things like that. So if in doubt, you can change your reference image to black and white, and that really, really shows you then where the dark areas are and the lighter areas are. And you could then sketch out a little tonal map, a contrast map, a little thumbnail sketch. But the more you paint, the more you recognise these things, the more you see. Yeah, it's like driving. It's all right, you can read all of the books on driving, but until you get behind the wheel, and you can take driving lessons and take your test, pass your test, but until you're out and about on your own in a car, that's when you learn to drive, I feel. And the same is with painting or drawing. You can read all the books, watch all the videos on YouTube, but until you actually sit down and start painting or drawing yourself, that's when you start learning. And that's when you can actually, things people have taught, things you've read, things you've watched, actually start making sense a lot more when you start creating yourself. So if you haven't already, do get a pen and a pencil and a piece of paper and start drawing or start painting, and everything I'm saying now make more sense if you've had a little bit of experience yourself. So what I'm doing now, putting the base coats onto these little feathers on his wing, and I'm letting each one dry. That's why I'm not doing them next to each other, because I could have just done one wash over this part of the wing, but then I might have lost some of the graphite lines underneath, because they are very light. I've actually taken some of them out with a putty rubber just to lighten them a little bit, because I didn't want them showing through the paint. So by doing one feather, missing one feather, one feather, missing one feather, doing the alternate feathers and letting each little layer dry, the lines are there and won't disappear, so I can actually still make out the individual feathers, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm rambling a lot, and I must admit it's early morning, so I've not had enough coffee today yet. So there you see, so where the two lines butt up, where the two washes butt up to each other, one's already drawn and putting the next one on, it is actually making a line, a hard line in the watercolour, which has helped. So I did a couple more layers. I altered the colour slightly. I wanted more of a sort of a peacock blue instead of a teal colour, so I altered that slightly with glazes. And now back in with the darks. And really concentrating now, because obviously if I skip with that dark, I've got to, and it goes into the wrong area, I've got to quickly go in with fresh water on my brush, clean water, to remove it. So I'm being very, very careful now. Just getting these detailed lines in between the feathers. And what it is that line isn't actually there. What the line is, an actual shadow. The feather above it is casting a very tiny shadow onto the feather below it. That's all that is. So there you go, just working in a little bit of water and letting it bleed out into the rest of the feather, so that they'll end up looking like shadows and not outlines, because the last thing you want to do is outline the feathers, because then it would just look cartoonish. That's okay if that's the feel that you're going for, sort of more illustrative, more stylized, then that's fine, but not the effect that I was going for this piece. Although saying that, it was just a random little painting that I wanted to do one afternoon, so it wasn't, I don't think it was ever going to be anything with a wow factor, but it was just enjoyable. And that's what we should all be doing. We should be just painting because we enjoy it, and if it turns out really nice at the end, then it's a bonus, but just enjoy the process. Every time you paint, every time you draw, it's a learning curve. Whether you realise it or not, you're going to be learning something. So I'd glazed a little bit more over those feathers, mixed up a new colour with a little bit more teal in it for these feathers, which are wing feathers, and then slowly, gradually going up towards the bird, you're bringing in the body feathers as well, the shoulder feathers. Now, you're probably thinking, Kerry, why don't you just do one wash of colour over all of the rest of this? Well, for the simple reason is the same reason that I used when doing the wing, is that stopping and starting like this creates tiny little hard lines in my watercolour wash, and that adds to the detail. So I'm actually working in detail fairly easily, letting the watercolour put little lines of dried paint in for me, and that just adds to the detail. It looks like I've done more work than I actually did. Working in a little bit more and varying the opacity, varying the amount of pigment in my wash as I'm going, just so some areas will look darker than others. and it just adds to that feel of more, you know, more feathers, I guess, greater detail in the feathers, without actually having to sit and paint each feather individually, which would have taken ages and which would have had exactly the same effect, because this subject is quite small. So that the part of the bird I'm working on now, I've wet the paper. There you go, just wetting the paper with water. It's deionized water, the same water that you'd use for car batteries, things like that, so it's has no impurities in it. And then just putting on a little bit of a orange wash. I'll be building up these washes later. And it's actually derived from the same colour that I've used in the cheek patch on the bird. So I've just taken that orange, mixed a little bit more yellow into it for these lighter areas, and then I'll just work light to dark again on this chest body area. The background looks lovely, doesn't it? Just that out of random, I don't know, to me it looks icy. It's strange because there's no blue used, well, apart from Payne's blue, but no, Payne's grey, sorry, no actual, which has got blue undertones to it, but no actual blue that you can see, and yet it looks cool. It's lovely, isn't it? But then the rose madder is quite a cool colour, so that does make the background recede. So yeah, cool colours make things look further away, warm colours make things look closer to the viewer. Keeping my eye on the reference image again, making sure I'm getting the detail correct where the orange feathers stop and start. And there you go, so more was added, more darks were added, just darker glaze, less water, more pigment, same, but the same colours used. Now just going in with a bit more detail on this area. Very self-explanatory, isn't it? You could just watch this without me rambling on. If you'd like to see any mediums or subjects covered, just let me know in the comments below. If you've got any questions, just ask away. I do read all the comments and I do answer all the questions. Got quite a few more videos lined up to be edited, so seem to be on a roll at the minute. So add in water there, just water, so they can let some pigment flow into it. There you go. And it's lovely working wet into wet like this, just adding pigment to the paper that when it's damp. It's lovely because paint just does what it wants to do, so it can be quite random, but as long as you know where you've added the water at, you know, where the paper is damp, then you know that the paint isn't going to spill out and go anywhere else. So only put the water as far as you want the paint to spread, because once it meets the dry paper it won't spread any further. And you could just leave a painting that loose, and because it does look very pretty, especially on the cold pressed watercolour paper. And you can load other colours into this damp wash as well. So if you want to add in a red in areas, you could do that, and obviously it would bleed out into the, it's called charging, where you add one colour to another. It would going to the blue that's already there, the damp blue, and you'd be left with a randomised purple. And same randomised because you don't actually know, you can't control it completely how much spread there's going to be. It all depends on how damp the paper is, and obviously the paper's going to be drying as you're working as well. And if you're working in a warm room, it's going to be drying a lot quicker. So turn the footage round for you so the bird's actually the right way round. I was still filming from the same direction, but I thought I could just turn the footage round. It's a bit more relaxing to watch with the bird the right way round. And then working in these little feathers, these secondary feathers. Well, there might be the tertiary feathers actually looking at the wing. Building up these glazes is lovely because you can do as much as you want or as little as you want. Same with the detail. When you're working on a painting of your own, just do whatever feels right for you. If you like to see your paintings just of washes of colour as opposed to detail, then work that way. Everybody sees the world differently. I love detail, so I start out quite loose, but I end up working most of my projects with a certain amount of detail because that's what I like to see. But I do appreciate other people's styles as well. So if you want to work in a looser wash kind of style, then work that way. If you like to work in tighter detail, then work that way. Do whatever makes you happy, and whatever the results that you want to see in your painting, follow the people that do the same. So if you like detailed work, then look at artists' work that also do the same, and then you can strive towards that style, but still make it your own, still make it unique. That's why I don't do traceables and things like that. For the simple reason is it all starts with you choosing a reference image and you doing your drawing, you creating your initial drawing from that reference image. That denotes that your style right from the very beginning, because what reference image I might like, you might not like. And it's just nice to be artistic straight from the beginning of creating something. So I like to work from my own reference images, and when I'm out photographing, doing all my photography for my artwork, for me that is the beginning of my creative process, is taking the photographs and then getting back home and looking through them on my computer and deciding which compositions I like, the lighting that I like. And for me, it's all part of the creative process. Everybody, more or less everybody now, has got a mobile phone, so you can get out there into the open and start taking photographs on your mobile phone. Or if you can't and you've got a pet, start taking photographs on your phone of your pet and working from those, because that is all part of the creative process. Okay, looking now at the bird, I just added some highlights with the white gouache. On the feathers, on his wing feathers, I just added a little bit of white gouache to my blue on my palette and added a lighter blue as well. And just building up some highlights around the bird using that technique. The branch I just covered with water, clear water, and then just adding some washes in and letting them bleed quite randomly into the branch to create the shadows and highlights. And obviously I did use a little bit of gouache, well, not obviously because you can't see it yet, but I did use a little bit of the white gouache to add more highlights to the branch, this side of the bird. So the branch that's nearer to the viewer, I put more highlights on because I wanted that to look as though it was in the foreground, whereas this piece of the branch that was behind the bird, I didn't want that to be distracting. I didn't want the viewer's eye to be pulled into looking at that part of the branch, so I left that more muted, so it would still have the shadow but not so much highlight. So I'm just adding a little bit of highlight. That gouache is really, really watered down. I'm using it like I would my translucent watercolours and letting that bleed into the damp paper as well. As I said, gouache is just an opaque watercolour. It will do everything you want it to that you can do with a normal watercolour. And there he is, that's the finished Kingfisher. Okay, if you've liked this video and you've watched it this far, please like and subscribe. Feel free to share with family and friends, it's really appreciated. Let me know if you'd like me to cover any other materials or subjects, or discuss lighting or brushes or different paint applications. I work in a variety of mediums, including watercolour, acrylic, oils, inks, charcoal, graphite, digital. Yeah, just please like and subscribe. Join me on social media. I'm on MeWe, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. I think that's all of them. Yeah. And have a great weekend. It's Saturday. I'm going to be uploading this now. So I will speak to you all soon. Take care. stay safe and stay creative. Bye for now. Bye.